Welcome everyone to the 5th episode of Voice of Supply Chain. A special shout out to our series sponsor, Real Sourcing Network, for their support of this particular program. This program is based on more or less sharing your stories, your supply chain stories. I would like to mention that tomorrow we will be hosting a program on the state of small parcel market post-COVID. Where do the carriers go? Very important topic. And we will be featuring a case study on Crutchfield. And we are very pleased to have both the supplier and the vendor as guests on the program. So please tune into that one. And on May 26th, we'll hold a program on 3D printing with a live demo. So make sure to register for this event as well. And I would like to mention too, we will be continuing to run all of these programs throughout the summer. So make sure to look for information on our website for future topics. So at this time, we'd like to start the program, and I would like to mention to please put your questions for Phil into the Q&A tab or the chat button. And at this point, I'd like to turn the program over to our special guest host for today, Larysa Cohen, Global Procurement Engagement and Transformation Consultant. And she's also our new co-chair of the ISM Women in Leadership Conference. At this time, I'd like to put the stage over to Larysa.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and welcome, Phil. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Voice of Supply Chain series with ISM. Today's event is sponsored, as Kathy mentioned, by the Real Sourcing Network. And here's a fun fact. The RSN offers quarantine hair, don't care, hump day sourcing happy hour on the first and third Wednesday of every month. So that happens to be today if you want to go see what's going over on rsnetwork.com later today. I'd like to thank Kathy Perna, trustee to the board and organizer of all things ISM New Jersey. Thank you, Preeti, our president, Gary, our president-elect, the executive committee, honorable directors, and valued trustees to share this time with you today. Today's very special guest is Philip Ideson. Philip is the founder and managing director of Art of Procurement, where he hosts the world's leading podcasts and leads the delivery of their membership community and consulting business lines. Prior to Art of Procurement, Philip led procurement transformation, category management, and sourcing programs for clients of Procurement and Accenture. Previously, Philip was head of international procurement, sourcing, and third-party risk management at Ally Financial. Welcome, Phil. Thank you for being here today. And how are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks. My pleasure, Larysa. And thank you, everybody, as well, for joining us. Really looking forward to the conversation. I know whenever you and I get together and have a chat, we've got plenty to talk about. So, I have no concerns there. And, as Kathy said at the beginning, you got any questions for us? Everybody, stick them in the chat. But looking forward to getting going.
Fabulous, fabulous. So just to kick that ball right off, in the last couple of weeks, you and I have talked about a couple of things of rolling out of procurement, peeling this sort of layer off as a pandemic, peeling this layer as we sort of come out. And I wonder if you could shed some light on some of the themes that you're seeing from CPOs, some of the chatter. What do things look like in this new day and age, almost like an old day and age? Yeah. Kathy, if we miss anything in the Q&A, please do keep me honest to make sure we don't miss anybody there. But this first theme of leveraging procurement as a growth engine. So procurement cost savings, that doesn't go away. It is always important to further investments. But I really wonder, Phil, what are you hearing from CPOs on that matter? Are savings still a top priority? Maybe the CPO's lens is changing. What do you think procurement value looks like in the future?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time for CPOs right now. And I actually want to take a back up a little bit before I go specifically into growth and just, some of the things I'm more broadly hearing with. We've got lots of things going on even today. We're talking about gas shortages with the pipeline shutdowns, and it's never a dull moment, I don't think, for a procurement leader. We had an event probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, and one of the speakers at the event we did was called Mastermind Live, and the speaker was the chief economist of Lloyd's Banking Group out of the UK, and we were talking about economics and kind of the big picture. And some of the things that were being kind of shared is that we're in this rebound. So we, at least in the US, it's different country by country, but at least in the US, we're in more of this V-shaped recovery now as we're all starting to come out of the pandemic. And that can, one, is creating a lot of challenges from a supply and demand imbalance perspective, but also, that it's important for us not to get carried away by seeing this rebound and thinking that that's the new normal. We're coming off a really low point and things are growing quickly and they are creating issues, but don't necessarily look at that and say, okay, now it's going to be, we're going to the moon, so let's look at, the long term as if we're just going to keep growing and growing and growing, that there's a lot of short-termism kind of thing in that. So just something that I wanted to bring out that was really one of the points of our event that I think is valuable for us to consider as we're now looking at, getting some kind of semblance of normality back for a lot of our organizations. I'm seeing a lot of challenges around what would be considered back to basics, for procurement. So maintaining supply because of the supply and demand imbalances that we're now seeing, and also mitigating cost increases. I think we might talk about that in a little while, because that's becoming increasingly important as we're seeing input costs all over the place shooting up. So definitely a focus on some of the basics from a procurement perspective. But to come to growth, growth is one of those areas that I think all companies right now are on a growth trajectory, no matter what happened to them in the pandemic. So, I look at the pandemic as basically three different types of companies. One would be those organizations that just grew, like they went like a rocket ship, in some cases unexpectedly because of the impact of the pandemic. And yes, you look at obvious examples like Amazon and everybody going online. Look at DoorDashes of the world and all these Instacart kind of delivery services. But even traditional, like businesses that traditionally grew at maybe a percentage point or 3 percentage points a year, like supermarket chains, growing suddenly at 20%. So for those organizations that grew, they need to maintain that growth because they've got to look at their comps. So what did they grow last year versus this year, and maintain that if they're going to continue to grow the valuations. So growth is really important for those types of organizations. Then you have the ones in the middle who didn't really grow, but didn't decline that much. It was all about maintaining the status quo. Like, let's just try and ride out the pandemic with us, maybe a glancing effect, but not a big effect. So now that we're coming out of that, it's okay, now how do we kind of restart the growth engine, if you will? And then on the other side, there's the organizations who were completely devastated by the pandemic. Airlines, live entertainment companies, and they basically went to zero. So of course for them there's no way but up. So they're looking at growth. So growth used to be, important to organizations based on where they were in their kind of economic cycle. Today, every single company is valuing growth. So that's, I'm seeing that more and more executives, more and more CPOs are really trying to figure out how can we do that, and kind of what's the procurement role in enabling it.
It's a pretty large, sorry, we have a visitor here, excuse me. Needs to get out of here.
Hopefully we don't get too much noise from the peanut gallery later if dismissive of some of the answers.
George wanted to comment. It's a pretty broad continuum, to your point. I mean, there are those companies that just grew like wildfire due to the nature of pandemic. And I mean, I think you said Amazon, DoorDash, these more service deliveries, but I think of Zoom itself, yeah. Right? And then these folks who were nearly stagnant, if not stagnant, like travel and entertainment and leisure. And I guess, when we get back to basics, I think is what I heard you say in the beginning, to basics to me means getting your client what he or she needs when he needs it, fundamental. Now, there are cost savings that can go along with that. There's value add that can go along with that. There's continuous improvement and collaboration that can go along with that. Where do the basics sort of end in the near term?
Yeah, I mean, I think that securing supply is going to be, securing supply is one of those things that we kind of take for granted as procurement professionals and supply chain, that, you know, it just happens. And ordinarily, because we built the supply chains and put the supply chains in place, that you don't even need to think about it too much. Yes, there may be some flare-ups here and there that we got to take care of, but it's generally not a big issue. So I think that short term, there's definitely been more of an issue on that, even if it's, you know, I talked about it basics, but that helps enable growth too. And the reason that I say that, an example is a large airline. You know, spoke with the head of indirect procurement for a large airline not so long ago. And one of the things that they were saying is, you know, obviously they're on a very rapid growth trajectory now, because they were very, you know, they hit the bottom when nobody was traveling. Now everyone's getting their shots and is getting, you know, itchy feet and wants to go traveling again. They need to scale up quickly. The challenge that they have is that a lot of the infrastructure that existed beforehand that they relied on is now gone, because those businesses were decimated by the pandemic. So a procurement role there is actually, how do we rebuild this infrastructure? Cost almost doesn't matter, because it's about finding new suppliers, or even creating suppliers, and being a lot closer to those partners to fill the gaps of what went in the pandemic. And that being something that, yeah, again, ordinarily we may think that that's kind of blocking and tackling, but today that's a really big importance to the organization and to any organization. So I'm definitely seeing that. I'm not sure how long, like, saying where does that end? Like, where does the back to basics end? I mean, I'm not sure that it does, but I don't know what the time frame is going to be. I think it's different industry to industry, of where you can kind of get you got some level of normality has resumed, so you can start focusing on some of the other areas of value you can create. And not to say that you should forget about other things that you can do to create value at the same time. You know, I definitely wouldn't say, okay, forget about all the other things you can do and just focus on this one and focus on secure supply. But I think things like that are going to be short term, definitely a focus for a lot of organizations.
Excellent, excellent. I don't know if you want to delve into or kind of dive into talking about managing inflation and risk, but just before we do, so, you mentioned this concept of blocking and tackling, and I know you have this sort of theory of what it takes to really. I think about rugby all the time with this, right, where, you know, you're sustaining your position, you have your team in place, everybody knows their boundaries, and you're doing the must-haves. Could you expand on that a little bit about what you mean by blocking and tackling?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, I think of that a procurement organization needs to do the fundamentals, the basics, you know, what I consider to be blocking and tackling well, before you earn the right to really help the organization in other ways and bring more value in different ways. Because, you know, you can be selling to internally lots of really great and interesting ideas, but if they've got a lot of suppliers that are arguing at them about not being paid, then you know, they're not necessarily, they're going to be telling you to sort that out. Don't worry about all these other things you tell us that you can help with. So it's things like, let's see, making sure that the purchase order to purchase requisition process, the other way around, the purchase requisition to purchase order process is as smooth as possible. You know, you've got so many folks who get stuck in, I just need to buy something, and going through the buying process, and you know, it's really the procure to pay process, and having difficulty with it, that impacts the perception that those individuals have on working with procurement as a whole. If you don't get that right, then it really impacts your ability, again, to do the more interesting things. Supplier onboarding. You know, are you making it easy for your stakeholders to onboard suppliers that they want to work with, or are you creating lots of hoops and making it really painful? You know, the more painful that you're making it, again, is going to impact that perception that people have on what procurement can do for them. Cost savings in a lot of businesses is definitely blocking and tackling. However, I would say that you need to make sure that people trust your cost savings, because a lot of times, you know, we talk about cost savings and delivering cost savings, but the business doesn't necessarily believe what we're telling them. So getting that right is part of blocking and tackling. And securing supply we talked about before. So I think about all those things, which are how the majority of the business interacts with procurement on a day-to-day business, making that as smooth a process as possible and taking away a lot of the friction. You really need to do that before you can have that much expectation of helping with innovative ways to drive growth, as an example.
It's very true. It's very true. I've seen a number of my colleagues over the years. There are some folks who came in to solve a problem and realized that the problem wasn't even registering as a problem. So why have that process as well? Someone once said, I think it might have even been Donna, if there's no need for the process, why revamp it and why have it at all? Right. But then there's this sort of super rigid approach of, I have a source to pay process. I'm not letting you go anywhere until I sit down and get your requirements from you. And it's not inviting, it's not welcoming, and there's not a lot of value add there.
No, I want to talk about that a little bit, like the idea, and it's more than an idea, but agility. And I say idea because it's a word that I think maybe it's overused and maybe it's a buzzword at the time and all those things. But the idea of being fast and enabling a business quickly, that comes up time and time again as to what CPOs are being expected of right now. There's a Deloitte CPO report, which is something that I always track when it comes out. And they just released the latest 2021 version of that about 2 weeks ago. And I just interviewed one of the authors last week about it for the podcast, talking about the importance of agility and getting out of the way. How can we look at our processes and recognize that they're not necessarily fit for purpose for everything that we buy, or to enable our businesses to move quickly? Because as the economy is moving quickly, as our stakeholder needs are moving quickly, all those things, we need to be able to catch up and keep up and enable it, and not just get in the way. And that's going to be tough for us because we're used to following, a rigid stage gate process in all the things that we do. So certainly being mindful of that and not letting process get in the way of a business's ability to move quickly is going to be really important.
Definitely. That speed, the agility, the mobility that you mentioned, I think that's all part of the engine to increase the speed.
Mm-hmm. And it's something that we're just being asked of more and more and more by executives outside of procurement. And our ability not to do that, again, is going to impact the perception. We've kind of got this emboldened role in a lot of companies over the last 12 months. Now is going to be where, what are we going to do with that? Are we going to demonstrate to our businesses that, yeah, you were right to pull us out of the closet, so to say, and help us on cost savings and help us on supply assurance when we needed your help. And once we've done, I don't need you until the next crisis. Or are we going to be showing them that actually there's a lot more to what we can do than that? Now we have the opportunity to demonstrate it.
Definitely. I think we could segue into contract management, supplier relationship management, but we might be jumping into the third topic if we do that. Would it make sense to see if we have any questions from the folks on the board? Any questions so far?
Or any comments? What are you seeing in your organizations? Are you seeing that greater focus right now on supply assurance, or are you being challenged to think about ways that you can help your organization grow? And as we think about, just on the growth topic, how do we enable growth? Because it's one of those things I think that as procurement professionals, we often look at margin improvement as being the singular way that we help our businesses grow. Oh, we're saving money. That means that there's more money to go into R&D or go in and be reinvested in the business. And that's true, but there's so many different levers that we can pull. We can do things like we're talking about speed, increasing the speed to market. So how can we actually help our organization get to market faster with something so that they get a leg up over the competitors who may be slower in bringing something to market, capitalizing an opportunity. Looking at co-developing new revenue streams is an example of a growth lever that we can pull. Part of that is through supplier innovation. But an example that I recall was there was a telecom provider in the US who used their procurement software to turn that to basically auction off old handsets. So their
Yes.
organization was getting all these handsets, every day from customers being returned as they upgraded. Well, procurement then turned that into forward auctions and generated, it was a big organization, so they generated over $1 billion in revenue through that process, which is insane, for procurement to be able to take the lead in doing something like that. I think about being better connected with sales and marketing folks. Like, what are the objections that you're getting, that your sales and your marketing teams are getting when they're talking to prospects, and how can you help overcome that? What can we do as a procurement organization? And it could be related to supplier innovation things, but it could also be like data. There's one example where an organization has a lot of people in the field selling their product, and one of the objections they always get is about supplier risk. And so they were able to basically put an app on the iPads of the field team who were going out selling that showed the risk status of any suppliers at any one time. So when they have that objection, they can just open the app and say, well, actually, we're monitoring 24/7, not just the first tier, but to the second tier. And that makes that objection go away straight away. So there's so many different things that we can do to kind of connect procurement with growth that goes beyond the traditional. We save some money, then that gets reinvested in the business.
Absolutely. I think the business definitely sees that value and invites you again and again.
Right.
I didn't see any questions on the board, but the next thing that we wanted to get into was this cost inflation, maintaining costs, keeping costs flat, or even trying to reduce them as inflation rises. And the theme that strikes me there is this concept of purchasing power, how it seemingly decreases in times like these. Can you help us understand how to be more economically mindful as we see this shift coming in the couple of months or years?
Yeah, I definitely see there's inflation, cost inflation going on everywhere right now. You look, I pulled together some headlines just for a presentation I made a few days ago, and whether it's looking at lumber, whether it's looking at pharma APIs, there's so many different areas. People, because there's a lot of supply shortages of individuals. There's just inflation happening everywhere. Larysa, I don't know if you've just frozen or whether I've lost you.
I think she froze.
Okay, I can continue to answer the question
Okay.
as I kind of get my train of thought back. So it's going to be a big issue is managing kind of inflation and price inflation. So one of the things that I would really suggest is understand input costs. Taking a look at the cost models or cost breakdowns of the things that you're buying helps you understand what the true impact of these cost increases are, because a lot of times suppliers are going to want to try and forward on everything to you and perhaps hide. Maybe it's just a 5% increase in cost of a particular input that goes into it that is really minuscule in terms of the overall cost. But if you don't understand what the cost breakdown or the cost model of that particular product or service is, you may end up overpaying. I think that the strength of your supplier relationship is will also help you, whether you're going to be mitigating these in partnership with somebody or whether you're going to be essentially on your own to fend to yourself. Hey, Larysa, I just see you jumping back in. I'm still on a monologue answering the question that you had about mitigating cost increases.
Yes, please.
So those are going to, I'm seeing them, they're coming. The question is like, what do we do about them? And then the other thing to be mindful of is as we take some of these cost increases, as the underlying market costs go back down, making sure that we're going to track back down with our pricing as the underlying input costs go back down. Because one of the things that we see all the time is that when costs increase and you're in an inflationary market and there may be nothing you can do about a price increase, when the underlying costs go back down, the supplier is not going to come back to you and say, hey, the cost went back down again, I'm going to reduce my price. Rather, they try and keep it to themselves. So just being really mindful of where things are increasing and tracking those input costs so you can you can ensure that whatever that increase was, you're able to take it back down again when things return to normal.
You know, I'm not sure if you had a chance to, on my reprieve, if you had a chance to talk about the squeeze that we laid on our suppliers as practitioners when pandemic came through. I know one of the engagements I was working at early last year, CIO came down with heavy hammer and said, you know, you guys need to drop everything by 30% to meet our 30% budget cuts, or we're going to drop you. And it was that straightforward, and they were going to back it up. What I've learned is that, you know, that cost creep is starting to come back in. There is some resentfulness. There is maybe a little bit less value and collaboration that suppliers are putting forward because that sort of sting that they felt 12 months ago. Do you think that maybe that could have been handled a bit differently? Do you think there's a way to come out of it gracefully?
I don't think there's a way to come out of that gracefully, honestly. It's one of my big frustrations, and I say this coming from the automotive business, which is where I started. You know, I would see that all the time in automotive, where when there were pressures, you know, you would basically have the CFO or CPO or whoever write a letter to all the supply base saying, you know, we basically demanding 3% or 5%, or as you said there, 30% cost reduction. In the spirit of being a partner, you know, please comply. And basically, if you don't comply, you're done. So, you know, it might not say that, but between the lines, it's basically a threat. And then you wonder why you have a supply base that's not engaged and is not collaborative and is trying every single minute to get it back, you know, when they have the opportunity to. Now, there's some cases where, you know, you have to pull that lever. And I say that, you know, maybe you're about to go bankrupt. You know, it's kind of the final straw. You're not even worried about what 3 months or 6 months or 12 months down the line is going to look like. It's a matter of survival. But most of the time that's not done because it's a matter of survival. It's done because it's an opportunistic way to find somewhere to get some additional cash because you want to make, you know, have a better chance of hitting your numbers to Wall Street. And that's where it's overused, and it's really, really damaging. Because I see companies do it all the time now. An example that I actually read about just a couple of days ago, which is just sad to see, was a very large retailer who have the power and have the leverage in with their supply base, starting to fine their suppliers if their suppliers don't deliver to like 99% of the quantity of their orders. So as a way of mitigating around supply shortages, they're basically saying, hey, if you want to continue to do business with us, and if you don't want to be fined, deliver 100%. So no, let's work with you, let's figure out how we can flex our schedules, nothing like that. It's, we're going to fine you a percentage of the value of the product that you're not able to deliver to us if you don't deliver it. And so, you know, you have one doing it, and then an entire industry has to do it because they're all just fighting against each other. And it's those tactics that I get really frustrated with, because, I mean, it doesn't paint us in a good light for one as procurement, but for two, you're never going to get a trusted relationship with those providers again, with those suppliers again.
You know, for what it's worth, about 15 years ago, I saw that in a contract on the direct materials side with a very well-known lab supply company, and they were eager to sign that because they wanted to keep the business. They knew that they could meet the demand all the time, and it was never a problem. However, when they exceeded or beat lead times, they took something back on top of it.
Right.
They put a gotcha in there because they were confident enough that they could meet the demand for the volume of supply, but said, you know, if we exceed your lead times without messing up your inventory plan, we're going to take a little something back along the way too.
Yeah, you know, those things when it's mutual, I think that there's, you know, anything that's risk and reward is something that, you know, is part of a fair contractual discussion and negotiation, you know, because it works on both sides. It's when it's one way. And when you're in a position of power, you know, I mean, personally, I just think it's unethical. I think that abusing a position of power as a procurement person, as a procurement organization, is unethical, because a lot of these organizations don't have a choice, or they feel like they don't have a choice. So ultimately, they're going to ask, and they're going to do whatever you ask them to do, whether they can afford it or not. And you know, you'll face the consequences later. It's kicking the can down the road. But as procurement professionals, we should be mindful and understand the impact of that, rather than just going with it and hoping that, well, if they said that we can afford it, that they can afford it. Because oftentimes they just can't live without the business.
I see a comment coming up on the bottom here. So short-term thinking, someone said.
Mm-hmm.
It's very true. It's very true. Did we have any other questions or comments on this topic of maintaining cost or inflation?
I think we have a comment in the Q&A from Donna about when we're talking about agility.
Let's see.
And I can read that. I think you're on your phone now because of the Wi-Fi problem. So Donna said, from a procurement process, used to be the means to surface insights. And, now with the need for speed and agility, having valuable insights that can shorten the process are really valuable. Customers are looking for agility, fit for purpose solutions, while making sure procurement is a line of defense, from a risk perspective. The insights thing is so important. I just want to bring that up because, when we're working with our stakeholders, there's always this fine line, like procurement, what are you here to do? How are you here to help me? Are you here to help me run a process? Or are you here to help me strategically? And the determinant of that is often what insights do you show up with? And what insights do you show up with the first time that you show up? Because in that instant, they're making a decision of whether, well, they're going to help me, like I say, do the stuff I don't want to do. So that, which, has value in of itself, but it means you're going to run a tactical process. Or they're going to be helping me because they bring in all these insights on the market. They're helping me think differently about supply market, or risks that I face, or opportunities that might exist, or innovations, or whatever it is. This is somebody that I want to work and partner with. And having that insight is in that first meeting. And I think back to a lot of the first meetings I had, where you show up and you're kind of saying, hey, I'm from procurement. This is what we do. This is how we're going to help you. And I kind of cringe now thinking about that, because that's not necessarily what they need from you. And you either get lucky that that's what they do need from you, or you put them off for the entirety of the rest of the relationship.
Yeah. Suddenly someone needs to get a coffee, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a starter comment from Keith Lucan. I don't know if it got cut off or if it's just on my phone. Can you see?
Let me see. I don't see that. I see a question that says, what are innovative strategies to address critical supply issues, particularly the current semiconductor constraints? That's a tough one, because a lot of those are, your ability to weather those are based on proactive risk management as opposed to being reactive, or proactive supplier management as opposed to being reactive. If you find yourself in a situation with in a shortage that's a global shortage, and you don't have the relationships with your suppliers to collaborate on trying to find ways to overcome that, you're going to be in a lot of difficulty, because they're going to be working with the people who they do have the strong relationships with, the ones that they do know that didn't come and ask them for cost savings when they had difficulties, the ones that make life easy for them in terms of not in terms of expectations, but in terms of the cost to serve, and the hoops or the bureaucracy or whatever. If you're trying to find stuff and there's already a shortage, it's difficult. That's when you got to go out into the spot market usually, and or find brokers or do whatever you can to get your hands on this inventory, but that's going to be expensive. So
I couldn't agree with you more about staying ahead of the game with the more rarities or unexpected fails in supply. I'll digress a little bit and remind you of the story of my mother who sells the walkie-talkie devices.
Mm-hmm.
And, she has a batch of X that need to be programmed, and a number of customers across the nation, especially now that entertainment is opening up, outside dining is opening up, the two-way communications and the need to be within a particular radius, the demand is just through the roof. And she actually told me, she said, I am robbing Peter to pay Paul, to my good customers who did not jerk me around last year, who may need to pay a premium to get things a bit faster, but who were easier to work with, who I want to treat as a customer of choice. And I'm not sure if that sort of segues into our last topic.
Yeah,
but
I think so.
yeah.
That's who are going to be the winners right now, are those who nurtured those supplier relationships. One of the pet peeves I have is kind of the crowd check matrix that we all use in procurement to label where our suppliers are. And, we put all those that we think are important in that top right box of the 2x2, and forget about everybody else.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, for everybody else, we'll just make sure that we get the supply we need, but they're not really important, and we'll focus on all those. Well, most of the supply shortages and issues that we're having now, I'm sure, are coming from providers that we were forgotten about, that are in one of those other boxes, because we haven't necessarily taken a risk lens to the importance of suppliers. So when you're taking a risk lens to the importance of your suppliers, it will bring out a lot different suppliers than if you just take a spend perspective, let's say. So just kind of looking at where your risks exist within your supply chain purely from a risk perspective will showcase a number of suppliers and a number of products and services, because you really want to do this on a product and service basis rather than on a supplier basis, where you need to be thinking proactively about risk mitigation strategies. One of those risk mitigation strategies is then, customer of choice. And how do we become a customer of choice, particularly to those where, a supply shortage may have the biggest impact? And I think that's where we struggle. We often look at customer of choice again around spend, which are our biggest suppliers. Having built a third-party risk management program, I'm ashamed to say, one of the factors of one of those programs back in the day was which are the suppliers that play golf with the CIO.
Yeah.
So that I know that I'm not going to get any blowback from the CEO when he comes back from the golf course from his suppliers. But how can we not just look at those suppliers as being, well, bottleneck or non-critical or leverage suppliers or whatever it may be, and forget about them? Because things just like paying the bills, helping your suppliers make sure they get paid. Again, we talked about before, helping them from an onboarding perspective so that things go as easily, as smoothly as possible. When you're doing a sourcing event, not just, pushing them through a process and refusing to talk to them outside of a rigid process and kind of being a gatekeeper. All those things that really frustrate your suppliers, those are the things that are going to make it more difficult for you to really be able to rely on them when you have difficulties, like some of these supply shortages. So just broaden the net of how you're working with them, and think, is that how you would want to be worked with if you were a provider? Because when you start sitting on the other side of the table, it opens your eyes. I can definitely assure you, those things that you do when you sat in the procurement perspective, you don't really realize you're doing. When you sit on the other side of the table, I mean, it's real. People, as you said from the walkie-talkie example, that whether you might think you're a big company and you spend a lot of money with somebody, we're all humans, and the humans are going to help the ones that help them first versus
It's so true.
leaders.
And to your point of, who's playing golf with whom, it is an old adage that you always need to be mindful of, but it's very true. When I was in finance, I was managing $20 million assets under a 4-letter acronym, major financial firm. And one of my first checkpoints with risk was, is this supplier a banking customer as well? And you had to know that out of the gate because they just received different treatment, and it's how it was.
Yeah, that reminds me of a client I used to have, a global coffee chain. Is probably the best way of explaining it. And they would always talk about every single one of their suppliers is also a customer or a potential customer. And
Yes.
so you have to treat everybody, no matter how important or otherwise you see them from a supplier perspective, as if they're a customer. or as if they're a potential customer. And when you do that, that really changes the mindset of how you work with people. So you're having a think about that. That kind of was really so deeply inbuilt and ingrained into that procurement organization that tactics you may ordinarily use as a procurement person when you're using power dynamics, when you accompany the brand and the size that they are, that they could have got away with, they refused to do that because they didn't want to put negative experiences of working with them out into the marketplace. I see. So your video is still on your phone, I think, Larysa. There we go. As you're trying to switch over. We do have some questions here. Let me see.
Which one do you want to do first?
Yeah, can you elaborate more on procurement's involvement in creating new revenue streams, specifically in reference to the example of reverse auction of phone sets? Yeah, and I think I can say like who the organization was. So this was Sprint. And what they did is they used their procurement technology to run auctions to sell old handsets. And so what Sprint found is that they had all these handsets that were just being given in, and being exchanged as people in stores were upgrading their phones, and they didn't really know what to do with them. Or, they would dispose of them, recycle them, or just kind of sell them at a flat rate to be used somewhere else, maybe to be used in another part of the world. What procurement was able to do is bring auction technology that they used, on the buy side to the sell side and set up auctions where they had everybody bidding for all these handsets. And they found that, the prices increased significantly from where they were just recycling them, and it turned it into a revenue stream. Let's see what else. Yeah, I see the one from Keith, and I'm not sure if that's one I can answer. It's more a question of what are you seeing within ISM New Jersey membership to examine doing what you were doing internally to prepare for post-COVID. What I can say on that for preparing for post-COVID, what I've seen a lot of CPOs doing is scenario analysis and scenario planning. Because nobody really knows what's going to happen over the next 6, 12, 24 months even. It's just modeling a bunch of scenarios. And you can do this at a category level as well. It doesn't need to be at an organizational level to say, what happens if, and then come up with a range of scenarios that can go from, we're going to the moon in terms of growth, all the way down to we're going to have this sharp burst, then we're going to have a deep recession, or that what if there's a critical shortage in labor or in one of the parts that goes into what I buy, depending if you're buying something that's product-based or service-based, and then modeling that out and seeing that'll give you a good idea. And this is what I see organizations doing. This will give you a good idea of where your weak links are. So you can start thinking about risk mitigation and proactive risk mitigation. So that's definitely what I think about of preparing for kind of post-COVID and whatever it looks like, because I think a lot of us don't really know what post-COVID truly looks like. And that's going to differ geographically. Post-COVID in the US is going to differ from post-COVID in the UK versus in Canada and Mexico, based on access to vaccines and take-up and how much support the governments gave in each one of those countries to the economy and how quickly that support is pulled. There's so many different unknowns and variables. That's what I'd recommend, is do some scenario planning. Any other questions?
No, I don't see any other questions, but I will mention, Keith, I'll email you in reference to the New Jersey, the ISM New Jersey membership question. Hey, Phil, how did you get started?
How did I get in procurement or without procurement?
In procurement.
Yeah, I never intended to be in procurement, so I didn't really even know what it was. So I was on I joined Ford Motor Company on their graduate scheme. And my intention really was, I'd like to do something like sales or marketing, well, not really sales, but marketing or HR or organization design, you know, anything but, well, I say anything but procurement. Procurement wasn't even a consideration. And so when you join a graduate scheme like that, you know, they just place you somewhere and you kind of at their mercy. And they placed me into a role as a buyer. And I had no idea what I was doing or what a buyer even was. You know, sat down on the first day and they said, here's your portfolio of products that you're now responsible for. And it was in plastics. So things like cup holders, ashtrays back in the day, armrests in the vehicle for Jaguars and Ford vehicles. And, you know, and I had this portfolio and it was like $15 million of spend a year. It's like, wow, I now have thinking that, you know, this is now my money to spend. It's like, wow, I've got responsibility for $15 million worth of stuff. That's insane. You know, I just came out of university and I was hooked. You know, I got to travel a lot, which is really something I'm passionate about. And I got to work with people all around the world every day. And when my rotation came up after the 9 months and I was due to go somewhere else, and I can't remember where, I asked to stay and I haven't left. So yeah, I mean, I've pretty much touched everything you can touch. But I see, Donna, you asked, did procurement find you or did I find it? Yeah, it's like the question I ask on the pod. It definitely found me. So, and yeah, I just stayed and built a career around it.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions. If anybody has any questions, just please put them in the chat or the Q&A. We only have a few more minutes left, but please insert your question before we have to close out today's program.
Yeah, you know, I'd say that that's a great question. What do you think stands in the way of building trust? Doing what you say you're going to do, I think, is part of it. I think that maybe we tell suppliers certain things or even stakeholders certain things that we don't necessarily follow through on, and that may not be deliberate. It's just because we've got a million things going on. I think being open and honest and transparent in communication. I think when you talk to suppliers, for sure, they don't really know what's going on. You know, they don't know where they are in a sourcing process. They don't know why we rejected them and went with somebody else. They don't know the status of something. And we don't necessarily spend a lot of time being open and transparent because we've been brought up with this mindset of information is power. And so the more information I provide, maybe I'm going to be giving something up that they can use against me in a negotiation later. So I'd seen that's, when you think about suppliers, that's a really big thing. And because we kind of operate in this black box, you know, we've almost like created this black box of procurement for ourselves. And perhaps it's to try and protect ourselves from, you know, job preservation, but just being a lot more open and transparent about what we do, why we do it, how we're doing it, and being more communicative, I think is a big part of being trusted and developing more trust. Yeah, procurement professionals are skeptical of suppliers, absolutely. You know, it's the whole working with the sales and working with sales and procurement together, you know, and looking at sales as being they're trying to, it's like a zero-sum game, you know, it's win-lose. It's sales are trying to get the best deal out of me and trying to extract me for everything I can get, and vice versa. And I think the quicker that we can get out of that mindset, the faster you'll be able to find some really interesting solutions. And what's wrong with leaving a bit of money on the table if it means that it's going to open the door to greater collaboration, and that they're going to be the ones that come and say to you, hey, there's a chip crisis coming, you know, we're going to secure the supply for you. You know, that's basically what you're buying.
Yep, setting your position, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do you see the question, Larysa?
I don't see any question. The last I see is agree from Donna. Is there more?
Yeah, one in the Q&A. So what are
Okay.
innovative strategies that organizations can pursue to accelerate their supplier diversity spend, particularly among diverse suppliers who were significantly impacted as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah.
You know, it does depend on where you are as an organization. in terms of your supply diversity program, because I wouldn't necessarily want to make any assumptions to say it's either non-existent or you're really pretty advanced and you're just looking to do more. You know, there's things, what I would, this may be something that you're doing already, but really encouraging diverse suppliers within your community to, you know, kind of doing outreach, making yourself open to diverse suppliers to tell you about themselves. You know, whether it's holding kind of a demo day or a virtual event where diverse suppliers can not necessarily pitch you, but just educate you about who they are and what they're doing. And because there's such a huge opportunity in working with providers in our local communities and supporting our local communities as we come out of the pandemic, because, you know, one, it's good business sense from a supporting your local community, but also, you know, you talk about customer of choice, you can really build some strong relationships with customers who are going to be there for you when you're doing that. But it's hard to answer the question without knowing exactly where you are on the maturity curve from a supply diversity program, because, you know, you really need to make sure that you get the basics down first, even knowing what your diverse spend is, and being able to report on it, looking at opportunities from a category by category perspective before you start trying to be a little bit more innovative. Some good questions coming in.
Definitely.
I don't see any more questions.
So Phil, I know how you love the spotlight, so you might shoot me later for doing this, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of Phil's podcast series. One is just better than the next. If you find yourself with 40, 50 minutes to go take a walk on a beautiful springtime afternoon, pop one on. My latest favorite is integrating risk management into the sourcing process. Flip over to his channel, listen to his voice, and learn a thing or two, because it just helps you think about your practicing differently, more innovatively, and takes you out of your box. So sorry for the shameless plug there, Phil, but I just couldn't resist myself.
No problem. No, thank you, Larysa. No, I really appreciate it. Yeah, we try and cover a whole wide range of topics. So there should be something out of the 400 episodes, which is crazy now. We've been doing it for the last 6 years or so. Something for everybody, I think. Yeah, and you know, to get that, you go to your local, go to your podcast app on your phone. You could search for Art of Procurement, or they're all at artofprocurement.com/podcast as well.
Well, we got a couple of more questions coming in while you were all talking. What are the latest technologies or systems that can improve visibility to supply chain? Examples, inventories, supplier sites, etc.
Yeah, honestly, that's probably a difficult question to answer, because one, from the supply chain perspective, I'm not as well versed as I am from a procurement perspective on supply chain technology. But two, there's just such a, you know, we did a tech map recently with a venture capital firm.
Yes.
And we put over 300, there's over 300 suppliers just in procurement before you even think about supply chain. So yeah, I probably have to skip that just because it's a really broad question. I don't really know where to start. On the chip, the question from Norman, how long do you think the chip shortage will last? Is China going to flood the market? I'm not sure. I'm not sure for two reasons. One is I'm not an expert in chip manufacturing, so I wouldn't want to claim to be one. You know, as you think about gaming this out, flooding the market, you know, assuming that there is supply in the market, that additional capacity in China comes online, I think it's more of a political question. You know, what does China want to do? Does China want to continue to have shortages in the market? Is that good for them? Or do they want to flood the market to actually stop others around the world investing in the capability to manufacture chips? You know, my opinion is that China is probably going to want to not necessarily flood the market, because that's going to depress the price, but at least want to abate the crisis, because what they don't want is an investment in manufacturing in the US or in Mexico or in Eastern Europe or anywhere else, because being that bottleneck comes with is a privileged political position for them because there's leverage from it. So I think they'll want to do everything they can to make sure they maintain that.
Thank you. And I know we're at the end of our hour, everybody. So I do want to thank you, Phil and Larysa, for joining us today for this great program. You brought so much information to the table today, Phil. Thank you so much. And thank you, Larysa, for being our guest host for today. We really do appreciate it. And I want to welcome thank everybody for joining us today. And I do want to let you know that our next Voice of Supply Chain, we're going to have Micah Do. So we'll have Procurement Foundry on next month. So it's been a great afternoon, and have a great afternoon. And again, thank you, Phil and Larysa, for doing this program today.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invite, Kathy.
Always, Phil.
Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.